AI systems are getting crazy powerful and more autonomous every single day. But what happens when they fail? And trust me, they do fail. We're left with a complete legal mess. So let's dive into this, because the way we think about who's to blame when AI gets it wrong, well, it's about to change in a big way.
Seriously, just think about it for a second. Is it the human safety driver who is supposed to be paying attention? The car manufacturer? The software engineers who wrote millions of lines of code? This isn't some sci-fi hypothetical anymore. This is a question that real judges are struggling with right now, and our old playbook just isn't cutting it.
And that leads us to this massive problem. See, right now, the law's default answer is kind of lazy. It just points the finger at the nearest human. It turns that person into what legal scholars have started calling a liability sponge, someone who just soaks up all the legal, moral, and financial blame for a failure in a system that's way too complex for any one person to handle. The question is that fair, or is it even helping us build safer systems?
Now, you'd think the obvious solution to avoid creating these liability sponges is just put a human in the loop, right? Have someone watching the machine, ready to jump in. It's the solution regulators love. But here's the thing. This entire idea of simple human oversight, it's built on a complete myth.
This number, wow. This tells a pretty shocking story, 100%. So in a 2016 study, a robot was leading people out of a simulated fire when it started to malfunction. Now, even though a safe exit was clearly marked right there, 100% of the participants followed the broken robot toward a blocked exit, every single one.
That experiment is a perfect and maybe a little terrifying illustration of this concept, automation bias. It's a fundamental cognitive trap. We are just wired to trust the machine, even when our own eyes are screaming at us that something is wrong. We default to the automated answer, which just completely blows out the whole idea of a human safety check.
Okay, so if our own brains are basically tricking us into over-trusting AI, what are the consequences in the real world? This is exactly where that concept of the liability sponge stops being a legal theory and starts being incredibly dangerous.
To make matters even worse, there's something else at play called vigilance decrement. Look, to put it simply, our brains are just terrible at paying attention to things that are boring and repetitive. When a system works correctly 99.9% of the time, the human supervisor gets lulled into this state of cognitive disengagement. We tune out.
And this isn't just a theory. Look at the tragic, real-world case of Srivijaya Air Flight 182. A relatively simple auto-throttle malfunction went completely unnoticed by experienced pilots for several minutes. Why? Because the system was so incredibly reliable, they had mentally checked out. By the time the autopilot finally gave up and screamed for help, it was too late. That's vigilance decrement in its most devastating form.
So, here's the crucial point. We position a human operator to be the failsafe, but we design a system that makes it almost impossible for them to actually succeed. They become what's called the moral crumple zone. It's a chillingly perfect metaphor. Just like the front of your car is designed to crumple and absorb the impact of a crash, the human is put there to absorb the full legal and moral impact, protecting the system's manufacturer from the real consequences.
Remember that fatal Uber self-driving crash in 2018? The entire global narrative focused on the safety driver who was streaming a TV show. But that focus, as Lee's quote points out, conveniently absolved the failures of the automation design. The driver became the perfect liability sponge, distracting all of us from the much deeper, more systemic flaws in the AI itself.
And this whole disaster is made so much worse because the fundamental legal tool we use to decide who is at fault, the law of negligence, it just completely falls apart when you try to apply it to modern AI. For over 70 years, courts have used this, the learned hand formula. It sounds fancy, but it's really just a simple cost-benefit analysis. It says you're negligent if the cost of taking a precaution, the burden, or B, is less than the probability of an accident, P, times how bad that accident would be, L. It's an elegant, rational formula that's worked for a long time. But here's the exact point where the formula breaks. For a simple tool like a hammer, the burden of precaution is clear, right? Check for cracks, don't swing it near people, store it somewhere safe. But for an AI, the burden becomes what? Verifying outputs you literally can't see? Debugging billions of parameters? Predicting bizarre edge cases that no human has ever even thought of? The two aren't even in the same universe. And this is the knockout blow, with a black box AI, where even its creators don't fully understand its internal logic. The burden of precaution, that B in the formula, becomes undefined. It's unknowable. It basically approaches infinity. And you can't use a formula when one of your key variables is infinity. The whole thing just breaks.
So, if the old model is broken, what's the solution? Well, the legal scholars behind this research propose a whole new framework. Instead of trying to hunt down a single person to blame, they suggest we build a system of shared responsibility, a system built on 3 key pillars of accountability.
And here they are. First, a duty for the deployer, the hospital or the trucking company that's actually using the AI, to create a true partnership between the person and the machine. Second, a duty for the developer to prove their AI is robust and safe from the very beginning. And third, a shared duty for everyone involved to monitor and report failures after the AI is released into the wild.
Let's dig into that first pillar, the deployer's duty. This says you can't just stick a person in a chair and call that oversight. The company using the AI has a duty to thoughtfully design the work itself. That could mean creating friction to deliberately slow down big decisions, or giving operators cognitive handrails, real tools to understand the AI's reasoning. And most importantly, it means training them for when the system inevitably fails, not just for when it works perfectly.
Now for Pillar 2, and this is a big one for developers. This completely flips the script. Instead of the victim having to prove the AI was flawed, the developer has to prove they followed industry-best standards, like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. If they can prove it, they get a safe harbor from liability. This puts the responsibility right where it should be, on the party who can prevent the harm at the lowest cost.
And finally, the third pillar recognizes that safety isn't a one-time thing you do at launch. It creates an ongoing shared responsibility. Developers have to patch new vulnerabilities. Deployers must report failures to shared databases. This creates a powerful feedback loop, allowing everyone, including insurance companies who suddenly become a kind of market regulator, to see patterns, quantify actual risks, and establish a clear standard of care for the whole industry.
So when you put these 3 pillars together, you get a fundamentally new and frankly way more rational model for AI safety and accountability.
This slide sums it all up perfectly. We move away from the old, broken model where an undefined burden of precaution led to an unforeseeable probability of harm, which created the liability sponge. And we move to a new model where the burden is a set of verifiable duties, and the probability of harm is something we can actually quantify with real-world data. We move from a blame game to calculable, manageable risk.
So ultimately, this whole analysis leaves us with a much more important question to think about. We've been so focused on simply asking if there's a human in the loop, but that was always the wrong question. The real question we need to ask ourselves now is, what kind of loop are we actually building? Is it a trap designed to create a scapegoat, or is it a true partnership designed for genuine safety?